Week 3 of Super Rugby is done and dusted. Our chief writer Rob was at the Stormers game on Friday, and our editor Garen watched from the comfort of his nearest sports pub. Good morning and welcome back to the studio, guys.
Morning, Jen.
Hi, Jen.
Well, I want to talk about the first game of the weekend. Were your predictions correct?
Sadly not. And I think we both agreed that the Cheetahs would beat the Rebels, but they didn't. They got hammered, in fact. So a bad start to for the Cheetahs on their overseas leg. Those fans will remember from last season, they lost their first game and then went on to win their next 3 games on tour. I don't know about Europe, but I don't see that happening this time. Junaka Drotsky's already read the right act to them. The Rebels were playing in their first game, and we've seen in previous rounds that the teams that played their first match really struggled. But the Rebels were far too good for the Cheetahs in Melbourne, and I think the Cheetahs have got their work cut out for them in the remainder of their tour. So they've now played 3, lost 2, so not looking great for them either.
Yes, they got onto the back foot quite early, Jen, which is always not a particularly good thing, especially when you go on tour. It's sometimes it seems to almost sort of put a little bit of a sort of an early hoodoo on a side when you go behind to the home side, and of course then the momentum, the home support starts to really get behind the Rebels. It was a very disappointing performance by the Cheetahs because they never really looked as though they had the hunger to try and claw their way back. They've got plenty of good names on paper, but now they've lost to the Rebels, and the tour only really gets tougher from here. So eking out even one more win might be reasonably optimistic, and it might be in line with my theory that the Cheetahs had their sort of big season last year, and this one might be not nearly as spectacular.
Okay, well, that was the first game. Rob, you were at the game on Friday night, as I said earlier. What was that like?
It was not the best game of rugby one has ever seen. We've been saying that a lot, actually, in early season. The weather, Friday night kickoffs are not ideal. Not a fantastic time for the Newlands public, Aaron. I mean, as you know, Friday night kickoffs are not that popular. Normally, you'd get a huge gate for an opening match at Newlands. Right. They only got 31,000, which I think most people consider a little bit disappointing. You normally expect sort of 45,000 plus for a first Stormers home game of a season. And it tells you a little bit about the public sort of lack of faith this year in the team, and I think it was still borne out in the performance. The good news was that the Stormers did win, which was something. They did come back from the terrible defeat against the Lions, but still so many areas that they have to work on. They had to come from behind very late in the game to win it. I suppose you could say that they showed good sort of stamina and sort of perseverance, but they had to score their only try off a good old line-out maul, which is pretty much their main attacking weapon. Not much else on display from them, so they go on to still a pretty uncertain side, I think.
Yeah, I agree 100% with Rob. The Stormers backline in the past has promised a lot but failed to deliver on too many occasions. They look better, I thought, this week with Lende back at centre, but with all the possession they had, to have to rely on a rolling maul in the last few seconds to pull out the victory was a little bit disappointing. I mean, the Hurricanes, I don't think are even one of the better New Zealand teams. So it'll only get tougher for the Stormers going forward. Like Rob said, they're now on tour, away from the media in Cape Town, so hopefully that helps, but they've got a tour from hell, I think. We'll agree. They play the Crusaders and Chiefs. They've won the tournament 9 times between the two of them in their first 2 weeks. So I wouldn't be surprised if they struggle in those 2 games and perhaps come back, with maybe even only the one victory to date.
All right, so that's game 1 and 2. What about the third?
The third game was the South African derby between the Bulls and the Lions. The Lions were undefeated up until that point. They did go down to the Bulls, so the Bulls picked up their first victory of the season. They had Jacques-Louis Potgieter back picked him for the first time at Flaaf, and he made the world of difference for the Bulls. He outplayed the Lions' Marnitz Boshoff, who up to date had been having a phenomenal season, picked up 2 Man of the Match awards. So the Bulls get their first victory. It was at home. It wasn't the greatest match ever played, and the weather wasn't even that fantastic for Pretoria, but they've got their first victory in the record book, so hopefully onwards and upwards for them. The Lions, you start to worry as soon as they start losing games that they might get onto a downward spiral. They don't have fantastic depth in their squad. They have picked up 2 victories. Again, I think I mentioned in week 1, I still think they're going to lose more games than they win. So not good from a South African point of view, but the Bulls, hopefully they take momentum from this game and go on to win more and more.
All right, Robin, do you agree?
The ominous thing really, Jen, is that the Lions now have to go to Durban to play the Sharks, who are the runaway favourites for the South African Conference. I think Aaron will agree that we haven't seen too much from the other sides to really suggest that the Sharks will be seriously tested in the South African Conference this year, although there is obviously a long road ahead and there'll be a few twists and turns. But generally speaking, the Sharks just have so much depth, and now the Lions are probably, after 2 wins on the trot, might well be staring at 2 defeats on the trot, which could change the whole momentum of their season. I thought the Bulls put up a reasonably decent performance at Loftus. As Flip van der Merwe said afterwards, Garen, the conditions again weren't ideal. You've got to feel sorry for the Bulls. They've had 3 wet weather games in a row, so they haven't really had a chance to show what they can do with a dry, on a dry pitch and with a dry ball. So they've scored 2 tries from their first 3 games. A lot of that has had to do with the conditions. They'll be hoping perhaps for a firmer pitch when they play against the Blues at Loftus. I think they'll claim that they've got a little bit of momentum. I didn't think their pack played at all badly. The Bulls scrummaging has improved in a big way. So they've got a few things that they can bank and have some reason to feel optimistic about their first challenge from a New Zealand side this season.
Yeah, that will be a big test for them because the Blues are coming off a victory against the Crusaders. They look pretty good. They've arrived in the country. They'll be looking forward to playing at altitude where they can run the ball, hopefully again a dry field for that match. But that's next weekend. We'll talk about that later in the week.
Well, that was week 3. For anyone who wants to know what your predictions are for week 4 and maybe challenge them, how can they do that?
The best would be to visit the sport24.co.za website, log on to our Super Brew page, enter the competition there, challenge the experts, send through your pictures from the match, and yeah, that's definitely the way to go.
Great, well, we will see you on Friday.